So I'm conscious I haven't really introduced myself either yet, so it's really nice to see some new faces here. So it's nice to meet you and some familiar ones as well. So Glow is the name of my company, and Glow is an app for website maintenance, which is a very techie sort of subject. But if you just try and think of it a little bit like a car mechanic, but for your website in a way. So if you think about when you own a car or lease a car, then you do things like service that car every year, or you MOT it, or you put air in the tires, or you clean it, or you fuel it, or whatever you do with your car. We do things like that for your website, basically. So we make sure that websites run smoothly so that marketing experts like Manny, that you're probably investing in to get more inquiries to your website, that makes all that sort of stuff super efficient, because that means when people get to your website from those ads, it's all running as it should do. It's nice and secure. It loads quickly. Everything works nicely. So Glow is an app that helps provide website maintenance. And then we have 3 different types of users, really, of our app. So we have what we call our direct clients. So they are businesses that have WordPress websites that require maintenance. So either they don't have the time to do it themselves, they don't have the inclination, the knowledge, and they just let us do it all for them. We also then have marketing agencies. So again, companies a bit like Bobble, a bit like Trio, any other marketing agencies you might have come across, who typically don't really like delivering website maintenance as a service. So what they can get is a white labeled version of our app, sell it to their clients, and then in the background, our team do all the work for their clients. So it's a nice white labeled service, makes the agency look great as well. And then our third user type is web developers. So Glow is a tool, it's a piece of software, like I said, it's an app that web developers can use to help them maintain websites of their clients. So a little bit like, I don't know, you've probably heard of like Sage or Xero for accountants, yeah? They will use those pieces of software to manage the accounts for businesses. Well, web developers use Glow to maintain the websites of their clients. So that's sort of how it works, how it operates. So as Manny said, the presentation today is around making your website, specifically a WordPress website, although there are 1 or 2 kind of tips in here that apply to websites generally. If you don't know what WordPress is, it's just a piece of software that you can use to create a website, basically. It's very, very popular. And that's what our app works with. So I'm going to crack on. Hopefully you'll come away with some tips that you can use and implement on your website. If you don't have a website, if you're not a business owner, you could take it back to the people that you work for. And if not that, then tell people that it was a bloody brilliant presentation and that you'd highly recommend Glow to anybody that you might hear needing website security and maintenance. So I'll kick off with a case study first, because the big thing around website maintenance generally for clients is that they don't really know what it is and what the threats are and whether they should be maintaining their websites if they've heard about some of these things. So I think one of the best ways to start is with a case study. So we got referred to a client at the beginning of this year. It's one of the best case studies we've had, actually. I say best. It was very embarrassing for the client. So they got referred to us because every time somebody tried to access their website, they were getting redirected to a very different website, a very dodgy website. And we all know exactly what I'm talking about. So you can just imagine the reputational damage to that business when something like that happens. Now, there's a million and one things that could happen to your website if you don't maintain it properly, but that actually is really quite a common thing. And there's lots of ways that it could happen as well. But they were a family mediation company. So to be redirected to this kind of content, it was even more embarrassing for a company like that. So we were asked to quite quickly help out and figure out why it had happened, and obviously to fix it for them. So it was really quite a serious issue for them. They actually had to rebuild their entire website from scratch because the way that they had been hacked was very, very, what's the word I'm looking for, sophisticated. So it was actually quite difficult for them to recover from it. Although we did fix it, they had to start again. So it's a very real threat. And hack attempts occur all the time, whether you are a local floristry business or you are Sony, they are constantly occurring. So 39 seconds is the average amount of time that goes by between hack attempts on websites. So just as I've started this presentation in the last 3 or 4 minutes, there's been lots of hack attempts. So we are obviously also on an educational push at Glow to make sure that businesses understand that just because they're a small local business, potentially, that doesn't mean that they are perfectly secure. They're never going to get hacked. They're absolutely fine. Happy days, nothing to worry about. It's not the case. Our software, Glow, tracks all of this kind of information. And last month alone, across just the websites that we look after, we prevented 55,000 hack attempts, which is quite a big number. But then, of course, that's only across the websites that we look after. So you can imagine how high the number is across all websites. And as I was saying a second ago, it doesn't mean that if you're a small business that you're okay. 43% of hack attempts that occur against websites occur against small business websites. So that's nearly half, isn't it? Clearly, the bigger ones are the ones that a lot will go after because there's more data that they can steal and hold to ransom and all that sort of stuff. But you're certainly not just above it all if you're a small business and you're not being targeted. So obviously, we pose the question, should you be taking better care of your website? Well, I know the answer to that, but I'm just going to give you a few thoughts, a few things to think about. So if you wind the clock back 30, 40 years pre the internet, let's imagine all 5, 6 of us on here this morning had a high street shop. Our business was a high street shop, maybe Jeffrey West, as where Joanna was before. So I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't have left that shop door unlocked at the end of the day. I really hope you didn't anyway. And
absolutely not. No.
No. I'm pretty sure that none of us would do that. And I mean, I have done this before, but not intentionally. You wouldn't intentionally leave the key in the front door of the shop either. And you wouldn't leave all the lights on at night on a dark street with all the nice expensive things that you sell in the shop window. These are things that you would never do in an offline sense. So don't do it with your website. You know, of course you wouldn't do those things, and your website's no different. It's just a case of making sure that you look after those largely simple things. It's just about the knowledge to know how to do it. And you're just making it so much harder for people to actually get into your website if you just adhere to some of those sort of simple rules. Of course, it can get much more complex, and we do deal with complex things as well. But there's a few basic things that I'd like to walk you through today that you could easily take away and implement into your WordPress website yourselves, or ask your web developer to do it. None of these things would take you longer than a couple of minutes to implement. So I said at the start that we sort of focus on WordPress websites. Our app integrates with WordPress beautifully. But one thing that people might be wondering, if they're watching this either now or later, is whether their website is on WordPress at all. They might not have any idea whether it is. So you can go to our website to check that. If you go to getglow.io/for businesses, there's a little tool on there, and you can just put in your website address, click check, and it will tell you if the site's running on WordPress or not. So if it is, it's a good start, because that means a few of these tips will be super relevant for you. So I mentioned earlier that WordPress is a very popular platform for building and maintaining websites. And that statistic there probably gives you a bit even better idea of the scale of WordPress and its dominance in that market online. So it actually accounts for around 37% of the entire internet does WordPress. So if you leave this call today and you access 3 different websites later on for whatever, it might be energy for your home or another business or whatever, chances are 1 in 3 of them are going to be a WordPress website. So it's an extremely popular platform. And what that means is there's loads of amazing positives about that. But one of the big sort of negatives or threats is that because it's so popular, it's massively targeted by hackers. So if you think back again to sort of like mid 1990s, when Microsoft was just completely dominant in the operating system market, on computers, they were majorly targeted for attacks and still are obviously to this day, but they were a million miles ahead of Apple, which is why Apple products were never really targeted in that way. One of the reasons anyway. So WordPress is kind of similar in that regard. It's so dominant. So obviously that's the first platform that hackers will try a lot of the time, because there's so many of them that can try and ruin, basically. And that's the thing with hackers, right? You've got obviously got different forms. You've got the ones that are serious cyber criminals that will try and hold you to ransom for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then you've got others that just do it for fun, basically. So I like hanging out with my brothers or my mates and going to the pub. Hackers like sitting in the bedroom and trying to get into your business's website and steal information and take it down or redirect it to dodgy website A, B, or C. So that's just what they enjoy doing. And then when they've done it, mission accomplished, they'll move on and keep trying a few others, basically. So they are quite frustrating, but that's what we help with. So Glow kind of help prevent that thing from happening. So I'll get into the tips now. I'll try and be quite succinct and non-techie as possible. But if I do stray into the techie side, then shout up and tell me off and ask me to clarify what I'm talking about. So the first one is to change the login to WordPress. So I did my best here to find an example of a business as far away from Yorkshire as possible. So these are in Cornwall. So hopefully nobody knows AW accountants in Cornwall. But one of the easiest things that you can do to start protecting your WordPress site a little bit better is change the default login web address. So every WordPress installation by default will come with this bit that I've highlighted in blue. I'm pointing at my screen and I just realized none of you can see me do that. So I'll move my mouse. So you can see after where it says .co.uk, it says /WP admin. And that's just by default. Any WordPress website that gets installed /WP admin or /admin. And you can change that. But of course, almost every hacker going will know that the default login for a WordPress site is WordPress admin. So if you change that to something like Bobble Bitesize or Saltaire or Lead or whatever, something that's totally different to WordPress admin, that's just one little step that just makes it a bit harder. It's not going to make it impossible. None of these things will make it impossible for hackers to get in, but you're making it harder than a huge portion of other WordPress sites that they can target really quickly if you leave it as that. So change it to something memorable but different. Number two would be to always update plugins. So WordPress is really kind of extendable. So WordPress itself comes with like a basic installation, and then you can add lots of things to it to make it do other things. So you can add, and they're called plugins basically. So you can add plugins for things like contact forms. You can add a plugin that means people can buy products on your website. You can add things, plugins that make your website a bit more secure or whatever. There's literally thousands of them to choose from, often completely free. But because they are developed by lots of developers all over the world, those developers release updates for those plugins, largely for security purposes. They've noticed a flaw in their software or something's changed about WordPress, so they need to keep up to date with it. And when these updates come out, you need to make sure that you apply those updates. And it's almost as simple as clicking a button, but really you should be clicking the update and then checking that everything still works correctly and it hasn't broken something else. But make sure you update them, because if you don't, that means that plugin version is getting older and older over time. And again, just like hackers know that the default login is WordPress admin, hackers also know the out-of-date versions of plugins and why they're out of date and why that makes it easier for them to get into your website. Whereas if you update them, keeps them fully up to date and secure. So make sure you do that, and it'll show you in WordPress when you log in which ones need updating. Here's an example of one. The plugin is called Responsive Menu, which makes you get like a nice little mobile menu on your website on phones. And that one needs an update, and it's telling you there, you have version blah, 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 update to version blah, blah, blah. You click the update button, happy days. So a bit like changing the login web address, you should also change the default username. So again, every WordPress website, default username, there'll always be one user account on your website when it's set up, and that will always be called admin. So again, every hacker in the world knows that the default user on a WordPress website is admin. So you should add a new one. So create a new user, give it a random name, give it your name or your company hyphen your name or whatever you want to do, just as long as it isn't admin, basically. Because hopefully I'm sort of building up this picture for you, but obviously hackers use automated software to like attack thousands of sites in one go, and they'll just instantly try the things that they already know, like the default login URL, the admin username, and they'll just hammer your website with login attempts basically until they get one, and then they're in, and then they can do what they like pretty much at that point. So if you're changing these things from the default, it's just making it harder for them to use those methods to get into your site. So change it to something other than admin. Here's an example from a website where there's 2 user accounts listed, and you can see down the middle of the image, there's one listed with PATC dev team and then another one PATC Glenn. So you can see that this site's done it well because there aren't any users with the username admin. So it makes it a little bit harder for them to get in. Fourth one, we've all heard this a million times, choosing strong passwords. This pretty much applies to anything that you log into online, really. And of course, your website is no exception to that. And it's 20 years now, we've probably been told, make sure you use a strong password. It's actually probably easier than ever to use a strong password that you don't even need to remember as well. So, you know, when you set a complex password, your browser can save it for you now. So Google Chrome or Safari can remember the password for you. Or you can use pieces of software like LastPass and 1Password, where you then only need that one password, and that piece of software keeps a record of all your other ones. So anytime you go and try and log in, it will put the password there for you. So you can make it nice and strong. But we still see people setting passwords like the ones in the list here, password 123 being my personal favorite, or my full name in lowercase with my date of birth at the end, you know, so like couldn't get more insecure really. And again, it's not really, if you're leaving all these things as default and you've got a weak password, it's just so easy for hackers to get into your site. And when you marry that with the stat I gave you at the start about how common these hack attempts are, you can see why it's so easy sometimes for hackers to get into sites. So make your password really strong. Now on WordPress, when you actually create your password, you've probably seen this on other websites. It gives you like a strength indicator when you're setting the password. So as you're typing in the letters and numbers of your password, you get a little bar beneath it that sort of says weak, you know, medium, strong, really strong, or whatever. So you always want to get to the far end of that bar where it's telling you that it's a super strong password. So have a look at that next time you're coming to change your password, and change your passwords quite regularly as well. That's another good practice to get into. And then lastly, it's good practice just to run like a scan of your website on a daily basis as well. There's lots of plugins that will help you do this. There's a very good one called WordFence for WordPress websites, which is completely free. You can click on the scan option and it'll just set that to run it on a daily basis or as often as you want it to. And the reason that you want to do this, there you go, there's WordFence. Excuse me. The reason that you want to run a scan and what it will do is that it goes through all the files and folders of your website, every single one of them. Because that's what a website is made up of essentially. It's just files and folders, pretty much as simple as that. But if your site gets hacked, there's a good chance that hacker will have left a particular file somewhere in that file folder structure, or a number of files. And what these scanning systems can do is pick up if those dodgy files have been added, because these systems know which files should and shouldn't be there, basically. So if it comes across any that it thinks, hang on a minute, that's not supposed to be there, or that doesn't come with a WordPress installation, that looks a bit weird, it will tell you, and then it will give you the opportunity to delete it as well. So it's really, really good practice to get into. You don't have to really do anything. You just have to set this up first and let it run the scan, and then it'll send you like email alerts if there's anything to worry about, basically, and anything to fix. So really good practice getting to scanning the website. A couple more left. This one is kind of back to plugins again. And yeah, you get different sort of stages with plugins. So it's it's very important not to install them if they're not supported. So I've given you an example here. Now, this is actually a very popular plugin on WordPress, redirection. So I think when I took the screenshot, I caught it at the wrong time as far as their developers are concerned. You can see that it's very popular because in the bottom left corner, it says over 1 million active installations, which is a lot for WordPress plugins. But in the bottom right, it says untested with your version of WordPress. So just be wary, be very wary of that basically, because WordPress is always releasing new features as well. And what the plugins need to make sure they do is keep up to date with those WordPress releases. And if it's untested, there's therefore, you know, you might be a bit unsure as to whether it's compatible, completely compatible. It might break something. So just be wary. And a general rule would be don't install it if it's not tested with the current version of WordPress. If it is compatible, by the way, it'll have a little tick and it'll say compatible with WordPress or whatever. So just be wary of that. And it really stands out as well when you're looking for new plugins. This is probably another one similar to sort of creating strong passwords. This is another one that we've hopefully become quite used to. And I always try and communicate backups in a way of thinking about sort of saving your work. So like before the days of cloud storage for documents and things, we used to have to press save on our computer to like a USB disk or a CD or whatever. I remember writing my dissertation at university and I had like 8 different copies of it saved everywhere because I was just, you know, so scared about losing it. Obviously with cloud storage now, that's made far easier, but that's sort of what a backup is. It's like a copy of your website at a snapshot in time. So our software at Glow, it takes backups of our clients' websites all the time so that if anything does go wrong at any point, we can get a hold of that backup and put it back on the server. So it's the site's back to how it was kind of thing before the issue occurred. So again, a bit like setting up that scanning system I was telling you about a couple of tips ago. You can do a similar thing with backups. Obviously, you could sign up for Glow, but you could also get a free plugin on WordPress, and there's lots of backup ones that you can install, and it'll just keep a copy of your website nice and regularly. Really good practice to get into, because a bit like I said earlier, you're never going to make your web, nothing is ever 100% secure. There's lots of things you can do to make it more secure, but you never say never kind of thing. But backups are really useful because if you do experience an issue at any point, you've got a copy and you can go back to it. You haven't lost everything. And then lastly, security certificate. That's been on the tip of the tongue of many digital marketer and web developer and that now for probably about 18 months or so. Manny will know better than me, but Google changed. I mean, Google are always bloody changing everything, to be honest with you, but they sort of said about 18 months ago that websites without a security certificate, now it's harder to make them rank higher on Google versus those that do have a security certificate. Now, security certificate is a bit of a techie sort of phrase, but basically when you go onto a website, in the top left corner now, more than ever, you'll see a little padlock or like a little green padlock. And that means that the website is secure. It's got a security certificate installed. But Google have sort of taken more and more steps over time to make you aware of sites that don't have a security certificate. So it does now tell you, certainly in Google Chrome web browser, it actually says not secure now, which looks awful for your business, obviously, but it's also a telltale sign of it being easier to get into and to hack. You can get security certificates for free, take a couple of minutes to set up. You can get ones that are a bit more robust that cost 30, 40, 50 quid, 100 quid a year. Usually more common for like e-commerce websites where people are buying things. So speak to your web developer about getting one of those installed. Super important, as I'm sure Manny will testify from a Google perspective as well. So that's sort of what it'll look like if your site hasn't got a security certificate. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of security certificates because that's probably about as techy as it could get. So that's sort of the end of my presentation. Thanks very, very much for listening to me. We have a free book at the moment, which is covers some of those tips that I've talked about as well. It's all about how to make your site more secure. So if you want that, let me know. And I'm more than happy to take any questions from anybody. And thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Phil. Do you want to just unshare your screen?
Oh yeah. Yep.
No, I think that's fantastic. If you could actually share that a link to the actual to that book, I'll add it onto our email at the end.
Yeah, will do.
If everyone wants to unmute themselves and jump in with questions, feel free to do so for Phil right now. I know Nick's got his hand up and eager to ask one. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's about the plugins. How easy is it for us to install plugins, or do we have to go back to our website provider?
So if you've got logins to your WordPress site, it depends on what level of access you've got to your website as well. So if you've got what's called an admin account for WordPress, that means you've got like the highest level of access. So you would be able to install plugins yourself if that's the case. If you've got a level below admin, you wouldn't be able to do it. But so the answer is yes, it's technically possible if you've got the right level of access. I would just be careful installing any new plugins. We've got a good blog on our website about what to look out for when you're installing plugins, because I sort of liken it a bit to shopping on Amazon. Yeah. So when you're shopping on Amazon, we look at things like the quality of the photos, the price, the description, the reviews, obviously, big time. So plugins is sort of similar on WordPress. They have a similar sort of thing. So don't install a plugin that's got crap reviews, a low installation count, and it's not tested with WordPress. It'd be a bit like, you wouldn't buy a product on Amazon, would you, if the photos were dead blurry and, and the reviews were 1 out of 5 stars. So the answer is yes, but just be careful.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Phil from anyone? I know I had one, is around obviously security. I mean, one thing I just wanted to mention to the group was, yes, Google did change its algorithm and its guidelines. If your site isn't secure, you will never get to page 1 on Google. Google does not like unsecure websites. So if you don't have a security certificate, you're never going to do well from an SEO perspective. The other question I have is in terms of, you talked quite well about security and passwords. Is there any kind of like tips? Because I don't know if anyone's going to agree. I think everyone tends to use the same kind of style of password or format from one element to another.
Yeah.
And I think we all probably started off with a nickname or a dog's name, and now we added a number to it, then we added an exclamation mark to it, and then we added another character to it. So I think over time it's really evolved to be the same password, but just in hieroglyphic writing, basically. Any kind of like tips you would advise to those that watch this later and those on the call now, that what steps should they take in terms of securing their password, and how to think outside the box? Because I know Google recommends passwords that you can save. Is that an option they should take, or should they create something generically?
Just before I answer, I can hear myself talking again. I don't know if that's...
No, you're coming through fine from our perspective.
Actually, that's better now anyway. It's a good question, because the password is just, it's one of the easiest ways in, particularly if you've got that admin username, I personally think one of the best ways that you can set strong passwords is to use something like LastPass or 1Password, which is, yes, it's another piece of software. Yes, it's another pay monthly system, but it's like a few pounds a month. It's like really, really cheap, particularly if there's 1 or 2 of you in the business. It's not going to break the bank, but that just does that job for you. It creates really long, complex passwords that you would never remember, but that's the point. And it makes it a lot harder for people to get into the site. I think one thing that I didn't mention in that presentation that you can sort of add as another layer. It's all about creating layers, really. If you had like 15 layers of security, that's better than 1, because it's so much easier to get through 1 layer, yeah? So it is called 2-factor authentication, which also sounds really, really techie. But you've probably come across it, maybe without knowing that it's called 2-factor authentication these days, which is where you're trying to log into somewhere like Google, Gmail, or your website or whatever, and then it says that they've texted you a code to your phone. or they're going to ring you with a code at the same time. So that is two-factor authentication. So it means that you've got a complex password, but even if you know the password, there's another layer where they send a code to your mobile and you've got to put that code in on your screen. So that's a really, really good extra thing to add from a login perspective, because it's almost as secure as it gets, because if that's your mobile phone that's linked to it, obviously you're the only person really that's got access to that code at the point that it comes through to your phone. A hacker is exceptionally unlikely to ever be able to break that. So it's one of the best extra things you can do. So
my bank's using that now.
Right.
Yeah, Amazon, I experienced that this week with Amazon. Amazon are doing that as well.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more common for good reason. The guys who built Glow, I didn't build Glow. I'm not a developer really at that level, and they always say to me, there's nothing that's like 100% secure. So even though two-factor authentication is excellent as another step, never say never kind of thing. But yeah, I would get something like LastPass or 1Password and two-factor authentication. Then you're really starting to get somewhere then.
I use LastPass and it's brilliant.
Yeah, really good.
As long as you remember your 1Password, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, there you go. Yeah.
What are your views on Google's passwords? Do you think that's secure?
Google's password? You mean in your web browser?
Yeah.
We don't use them ourselves at Glow or anything like that. We use 1Password. We've got clients that use them, and they're kind of similar in a way that they create really strong, like long passwords. I couldn't comment on how secure or otherwise they are because we haven't really used them. But I would just always recommend adding as many layers as you can to the whole process, basically.
Fantastic. Does anybody have any other questions as we bring our Bitesize to a close? I don't see anyone raising their hands. I'm just going to share my screen quickly, just for everyone's benefit. Our next events are in January, and we'll be talking about top 10 digital trends for 2021. I'm really looking forward to that one because there's a lot we're going to talk about. There's actually a podcast that we're actually launching in January about digital trends for 2021. If you're interested in viewing some of our podcasts, go to www.bubblepod.co.uk or visit our website or our YouTube channel. There are events scheduled in February and March, but we have changed the times from 11 till 12 to actually end of the day at 4 to 5, just as a trial. We were going to do it first thing in the morning, but because these are going to remain digital events, we decided to do them at the end of the day just to increase the number of attendees. Because we do get some people saying because it's mid of the day, they find it difficult to attend. Throughout this, obviously, Prez, I've had a few apologies come through. And we're hoping by February, we actually go back to physical events. But again, we'll have to play it by ear, but we know for a fact that in January, it's going to be another digital event before we do that. If you want to get in contact with us, visit our website, email me at manfred.singh@digital.com or call us.